welcome you all to our Connecting the Social Sciences webinar series. I'm very pleased to say that we are now organizing our third webinar and the first for this academic year, and very pleased that we will be joined today by Dr. Scott Parsons, and also very excited that our colleague, Dr. Duncan Lees, is going to be chairing the session today. So Duncan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olympia. I would say I would imagine people are probably not quite as excited for me chairing as they will be to hear from Scott. For those of you I don't know, so my name is Duncan Lees, and I'm an applied linguist based in the School of Education, Learning and Communication Sciences here at Warwick. So I'm absolutely delighted today that we're joined for this webinar by Dr. Scott Parsons. If these webinars are about reaching out and connecting people who are bringing together research and practice in different areas, it's quite nice that today we've got someone who just as an individual is doing a lot of that and much more besides. So Scott is the founder and CEO of the Flourishing Leaders Academy, which is an organization that supports individuals, schools and businesses in cultivating human potential and ethical cultures. And he's also a co-host of its Flourishing Leaders podcast, which is obviously just one of the reasons why we've invited him to talk to us today. He's also a senior research fellow in the School of Psychology and Counseling at Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey, and a retired US Army military intelligence officer. So today he's going to be speaking to us about using podcasts as a platform for disseminating research and engaging with different audiences. But obviously with a bio like that, I suspect he'll be talking to us about lots of other things besides. So towards the end of the session, there'll be a chance for questions and answers. But during the session, please do feel free to put in your questions into the chat, and I'll follow those as we're going through. And then when we get to the questions and answers, I can perhaps invite some of you to ask your question in person, as it were, on the camera or over audio, or I can just read those out for you as you're happy. There'll also be an opportunity at that point to ask any other questions as well. But obviously, before we get to there, I'm sure very eager to hear what Scott himself has to say. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to him. And if we can give a very warm virtual welcome, please, to Dr. Scott Parsons.
Thanks, Dr. Lees. Appreciate that introduction. Good morning from the U.S. state of Texas, and good afternoon to my friends and colleagues in the UK. It's truly an honor to be here with you. I want to begin by thanking Professor Olympia Palacara, Dr. Duncan Lees, and of course, my dear friend, Dr. Aidan Thompson, for the invitation. Being here brings me full circle in many ways, not only professionally, but personally. And this webinar series aims to connect academic insight with real-world application. And that's exactly where I've lived my professional life, at the intersection of theory and practice, between moral philosophy and military decision-making, between science and leadership development, and between ancient virtue ethics and the very modern human challenges that we face today. Today, I'd like to share the story of the Flourishing Leaders Academy and the evolution of the Flourishing Leaders Podcast, which is, I think, really why I'm here. But there's some background, I think, that informs how this happened that I would like to share with you first. And also the deep conviction that leadership, real leadership, is ultimately about character and flourishing. I often say that my journey began long before I knew I was on it. I spent the first part of my career in the United States military, specifically the Army, serving in military intelligence. And one thing that the military teaches you, perhaps more quickly than any textbook ever could, is that human beings are not robots following orders. You see that in the movies. Some senior leader asks you to do something you shouldn't do, and they do it. That's not really how it works, right? We are autonomous moral agents carrying the weight of life-altering decisions, often under conditions of intense uncertainty, pressure, and fear. I undertook 3 combat deployments to Iraq and 1 combat deployment to Afghanistan. In those deployments, I realized that moral complexity is a real thing. And that realization planted a seed for me. I began to see that leadership wasn't just strategic. It wasn't just operational. Leadership was and is ultimately moral. We're talking about the taking of a life, friends and soldiers that you're leading that might lose a life. The realization of leadership being moral came into full bloom when I joined the faculty at the United States Military Academy at West Point, often just referred to as West Point or West Point Military Academy, teaching character and ethics. I spent over a decade at West Point, the first 7 years as an Army officer and an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics, and then the last 3 years plus as a civilian doing the same thing, professor of philosophy and ethics, but also I took on the role of character development integrator for the military program. This is probably a good point where I should explain what I mean by the military program. So to put it in maybe a UK context, imagine taking Sandhurst in one hand and taking the University of Warwick in the other hand and smashing it together. That's kind of what West Point is. So it is an undergraduate institution of higher learning, but it's also a military officer producing program and location. And so we have 3 programs there and 4 pillars. I'm going to describe those briefly. It'll inform our conversation later, I think. So the 3 programs are the military program, the academic program, and the physical program. Now, obviously the military program, that's where we train them to be Army officers. The academic program is where they go through a traditional undergraduate program where they declare a major and they ultimately graduate with a bachelor's of science in something. And then the physical program is interesting because what we see in the military, and especially at West Point, is every cadet, every military soldier is an athlete. And so there's a specific physical program. Now, obviously, we have elite athletes that play on elite teams that play other universities, play other military academies. But because they consider every cadet an athlete, we put them in different programs. So they may be in a traveling team. They may be play other universities from club status. And if they're not doing that, we also pair we have companies, if you will, where they're divided up, where they play each other. And that's the physical program. Now, the military program is headed by a 1-star general called the Commandant. The academic program is headed by a 1-star general called the Dean. Makes sense, right? And then our athletic director, who's in charge of the physical program, is a civilian. And the reason why is we want our teams to be, we want them to win and be successful. And so we hire a proper athletic director from another university to come and manage our physical program. And then all of that is managed and run by a 3-star general called our superintendent. So those are the 3 programs: military, academic, and physical. Now, I mentioned we have 4 pillars. That doesn't quite match up. So we do have a military pillar for the military program, an academic pillar for the academic program, and a physical pillar for the physical program. That 4th pillar is character. And while it doesn't have its own program, it's integrated and fused across all of the other 3 programs. And that's where my role came in. I was able to, once I retired from the military, I took a position to integrate character, write the curriculum for the military program. And in that period of time, in those 3 years, I created character reflection journals based a lot on the Jubilee Center's model, where Aidan and I both spent a lot of time and got our PhDs, and created these character journals for them to reflect on their character, the virtues that they used in their military training, hoping that when they went out to be lieutenants and took over platoons, that they would do that with their own soldiers. Now, as a professor, walking into a classroom of cadets, young leaders of extraordinary potential, you feel a profound responsibility. You're not just teaching them how to think, you're helping shape who they become. And at West Point, I learned 2 things that changed the trajectory of my life. The first thing was character can be taught, not in a simplistic way, but through habits, reflection, community, and practice. And the second thing is flourishing is foundational to leadership. If leaders don't flourish, the people they serve rarely will. And these insights became the heart of everything that has followed for me. While I was at West Point, I had the good fortune, as I mentioned a moment ago, to get my degree at the University of Birmingham. In the summer of 2015, I presented a paper at the Jubilee Center conference in Birmingham, arguing that virtue ethics as a foundation of military service was the best normative ethical framework. At that conference, I met Aidan, but I also met Professor James Arthur, who began a long relationship and mentorship for me. And under his recommendation, I pursued a PhD in character education at the University of Birmingham, studying under some of the world's most influential scholars in virtue ethics and moral psychology. My work there deepened 3 convictions. First, virtue is not old-fashioned. It's future critical. Second, practical wisdom, often referred to as phronesis, is the executive virtue of leadership. It's the one that manages all of the others. And third, character formation requires structures, not slogans. I discovered the Jubilee Center's powerful framework, which continues to inform my work today. And it's also, as I mentioned, where my friendship with Aiden, which I truly, deeply treasure, first took root. I received my PhD shortly before retiring from the Army. And as I mentioned, I spent 3+ years at West Point integrating character into the military program. After that, I took the position of Assistant Vice Chancellor for Character and Ethics at the Texas Tech University system, which has 5 universities spread across West Texas, which includes 2 health sciences universities that produce medical professions across healthcare, physicians, nurses, physicians assistants, dental work, the whole gamut. I probably should just briefly mention what a university system is. And so in the United States, in certain parts of the United States, we have systems where they group different universities together under one kind of umbrella. And the system that I moved from New York to Texas to work with on character, virtue, and ethics had 5 universities. As I mentioned, 2 had health sciences centers. And then most recently, I co-founded the Center for Character and Leadership at Fairleigh Dickinson University, which is located just across the bridge from New York City. In all of the positions that I've been in, what struck me over and over again was this: the questions that shape cadets at West Point also shape physicians, executives, and help others flourish under pressure, uncertainty, and change. These questions transcend disciplines, they transcend roles, they transcend borders. And that's what led me to the Flourishing Leaders Academy. During my years teaching, researching, and working with leaders, I kept noticing 3 persistent gaps. Gap 1, academic research wasn't reaching practitioners. Brilliant research existed in virtue ethics and positive psychology and well-being science, leadership studies, but it was often trapped in journals or at conferences. Most leaders, teachers, healthcare workers, or students never encountered it, and yet they desperately needed it. Gap number 2, leadership conversations ignored character. We all know these famous leadership people, these business people, and they talk about these great things, and often they get character or virtue adjacent, but they really don't get to the heart of things. They focus on competencies, strategies, influence, metrics, but rarely on virtues, rarely on flourishing, rarely on moral courage. You can see why that would be super important in a workplace, and rarely, again, the executive function and needed. Gap number 3, people were hungry for wholeness. They wanted leadership development that didn't reduce them to productivity machines. They wanted to talk about purpose, meaning, relationships, courage, compassion, and integrity. They wanted leadership that made them better humans, not just better managers. And that's what gave me the idea of the Flourishing Leaders Academy. I wanted to create something to act as a bridge between scholarship and practice, ancient wisdom and science, leadership and human flourishing. And the work in the Flourishing Academy in Aristotelian virtue ethics, the VIA character strengths, and the gold and mean inventory, which is a brand new measurement that's out, and contemporary psychology from Harvard's Human Flourishing program to the Oxford Character Project's research. But it's also deeply practical. We help leaders cultivate the habits, virtues, mindsets, and relational skills that enable flourishing for themselves and the people they serve. The Flourishing Leaders Academy grew not because it was clever, but because it met a need, a human need. I like to say that flourishing is not a luxury. Flourishing is the foundation of leadership. And as the FLA, that's the initials for the Flourishing Leaders Academy, what the FLA did was grow into something quite unexpected. And I began having these extraordinary conversations with really smart people, really wise people. And I felt like I should go beyond the academy and share this with other people. And that's where the idea of the podcast was born. The podcast began as an experiment, a curiosity, and essentially this question: what if flourishing leadership could be a global conversation, not just a curriculum? I didn't want the Flourishing Leaders Academy to live behind closed doors. I wanted it to be porous, open, shared. And I wanted to bring the voices that shape me to a much wider audience. There were 3 main reasons why I started the podcast. The first was to democratize flourishing. We know that not everyone's going to read Aristotle. We know not everyone is going to attend a leadership course. But so many people I talk to, and the numbers on the internet show that millions of people listen to podcasts on their morning commute. And so giving people access to the world's leading thinkers wherever they are felt like a moral obligation to me. So that's what I did. I started the podcast. Flourishing is not owned by one discipline. So I brought together for the podcast philosophers, psychologists, educators, musicians, athletes, business leaders, theologians, neuroscience. It became a mosaic of human wisdom. Now, every episode is an exercise for me in curiosity, humility, gratitude, courage, reflection, and practical wisdom. In other words, it's leadership in conversation. And the world is hungry for that kind of leadership. I hear it all the time. People often ask me, how do you decide who comes on the show? And the truth is, I look for 3 criteria. The first, do they embody a virtue the world needs right now? So some examples would be courage, like Kath Bishop and Donald Robertson, gratitude, like Tal Ben-Shahar, humility, like Sean Casey, who's a Major League Baseball player, love, Matt Lee and Jelena Nukulik, hope, Katie Granville Chapman and Amy Bidston. And a flourishing study must be interdisciplinary, just like the social sciences, just like all of you. And I want to hear the stories behind the research, the humility behind the scholarship, because flourishing is always personal before it comes professional. One of the things I told Dr. Lees and Professor Palacara before we came on was that one of my favorite parts of these episodes is doing the research behind, find out who these people are, find out the things that not everybody knows, and bring that up in those questions. It shows the people that are guests on the podcast that I care enough to know who they are and share these things. I want to hear, that's my favorite part to share, but also the podcast has given me a deeper understanding of flourishing across cultures and professions, a network of friends, mentors, and collaborators, new insights that shape every workshop, keynote, and course I lead, and a profound sense of gratitude for the breadth of human wisdom. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds me that flourishing is not a theory. It's a lived, shared practice. I'd like to share a brief story with you to talk about the podcast's impact. I was speaking to a healthcare leader in New Jersey recently, and that person told me, Scott, your episode with Christian Christensen changed the way I lead my team. We started talking about practical wisdom during our morning huddles, and it transformed our culture within weeks. That blew me away. It was so powerful. Applied flourishing. It wasn't an abstract, it wasn't theoretical, but it was lived, and that's so meaningful. Looking back on the 30 episodes so far of Series 1, episode 30 came out yesterday, I realized something unexpected. The podcast has become a living anthology of flourishing. Each episode a chapter, each guest a guide, each conversation a contribution to a shared global inquiry. What does it mean to lead a flourishing life? And that anthology, those stories, those insights now flow directly into the Flourishing Leaders Academy, into classrooms, into workshops, into future books. So with the Academy and the podcast growing side by side, the next question became, how do we translate all this scholarship and wisdom into real-world practice? And that's where the heart of the social sciences comes alive. This brings us precisely to the aim of this webinar series, connecting theory with practice, academia with action. Flourishing is interdisciplinary by nature. Flourishing can only be understood and advanced when disciplines work together, which all of you know. Psychology explains human behavior. Philosophy explains meaning and virtue. Sociology explains community. Education explains formation. Leadership studies explain influence. Economics explains systems. Flourishing lives in the space between all of those disciplines, and that makes it uniquely suited to the social sciences. Here's how my work translates academic research into actionable leadership development. We take virtue ethics and apply it to leadership habits. Aristotle says virtue is a habit. So in the workshops, we, 1, identify signature strengths, map virtues to daily routines, practice micro habits of character, and build accountability structures. We take the VIA character strengths and apply that to personal awareness. We help leaders discover their strengths, their blind spots, their over or under expressions of those character strengths. This is what we call the golden mean mapping. And this creates self-awareness that transcends personality statements. Practical wisdom into decision-making tools. We explore moral perception, deliberation, emotional attunement, judgment under uncertainty, and leaders learn how to make good decisions, not just efficient ones. And we also take positive psychology and apply that to flourishing cultures. We use Harvard's Flourishing Index, Oxford's Global Leadership Research, purpose, meaning, and connection theories, stress, and resilience science. the outcome, organizations that are healthier, more humane, and more ethical. I'd like to go into a little more detail about some of the tools we use. So most people have heard of the VIA character strengths assessment that comes up. They take 24 virtues and you take an assessment to see where your top strengths are. What we're using is a new instrument. My colleague, Dr. Bob McGrath at Fairleigh Dickinson University, has created this new measure called the GMI, the Golden Means Instrument. And what it does is it takes those character strengths and it gives you a new survey and asks within context, do you over or underuse these? So they're within three contexts. It's work, relationships, and your goals. And what we do is we ask you questions related to those 24 character strengths. It might be the case that you overuse or underuse them. My colleague, Bob McGrath, in our workshops, he likes to talk about the overusage. The character strength, one of his most important character strengths is creativity. He says that he overuses those in relationships and at work. Now, how might someone be over creative? That sounds like a great thing to have a creative person on your team. Well, as he says it, is when he uses his creativity, some great things happen, but unfortunately he keeps iterating and iterating and iterating, and he never comes to a decision. He never finishes a product. So you can see how that could be problematic if he overuses it. He also likes to say that he overuses creativity in his personal relationships. So specifically his partner, Deb, what he says is he's the most romantic human on the planet. And he does these big grand gestures, dozens of roses all over the place. But Deb gets quite frustrated and she'll say something to him like, hey, Bob, that's great. Appreciate those flowers. But I've just asked you to take the trash out for the 5th time. Can you get the rubbish out? So you can see how overusing of a positive character trait in your relationships would be bad. I often do the negative. I often talk about underusing character strengths. So the one I like to talk about within the context of work is moral courage. Now, as I mentioned before, I've been to combat 4 times. You would think a soldier's courageous, and I'd like to think I've been courageous too. It wasn't too long ago I found myself in a position where I had a very toxic leader. They made the environment incredibly unsuitable, unattainable. It definitely was not flourishing. And one of the things I learned quickly in this was just keep your mouth shut. When they say things inappropriate, when they do things that are a bit questionable, just look the other way. And that's the only way to preserve your job. And you're not going to get these kind of jobs every day. So I did that. And so that shows a lack of moral courage. Ultimately, I left that position. And to this day, I still regret not standing up and saying something to this leader. So you can see how overusing and underusing these character strengths are important. What we do in these workshops is we help people see through these and then we coach them. We have bi-weekly or bi-monthly coaching sessions with them to see how they're doing. If they're overusing it, are they getting it back in alignment with who they should be? Or are they underusing it, getting it back in alignment? And we help them. Now, practice reveals what theory sometimes hides. People need stories to connect with concepts. Virtues require modeling, not merely explanation. Emotions shape moral action. Culture eats theory for breakfast. Flourishing cannot be implemented, it must be lived. In other words, practice is where the truth of theory becomes visible. I like to give the examples of doing either a penalty kick or a corner kick. The person that sits there and kicks the ball a million times over and over, they show up to practice early and they're kicking corners or PKs. They stay after. On the weekend, they go to the pitch when they're not playing a game and they do that. Those are the people that do well. You can watch YouTube videos and see how to kick a PK. Yes, you need to know exactly where to place your foot, the laces on the ball. You need to know these things. But you're not going to go out there and put everyone in unless you go out and practice. And that's where practice is important. Now, what practice gains from the social sciences? Let's think about this. On the other side, leaders desperately need what academics provide: rigor, clarity, frameworks, measurement, evidence, critique, nuance. Without academia, leadership development becomes shallow. Without practice, scholarship becomes isolated. But together, they form a virtuous partnership that brings the social sciences to life. And so from military service to academic research, from leadership development to podcasting, from virtue ethics to real world flourishing, it all comes back to one simple truth: leadership is humanity in action. As I come to a close and get ready to take on your questions, I want to leave you with a simple conviction that has shaped every part of my journey. From the military to West Point, from my doctoral studies to the Flourishing Leaders Academy and the podcasts, flourishing is not a luxury. It's not an extra. It's not something we pursue after the deadlines, metrics, and pressures of life. Flourishing is the foundation of good human life, and yet, therefore, it is the foundation of good leadership. Leadership that is rooted only in strategy becomes brittle. Leadership rooted in character becomes enduring. Leadership that focuses only on performance becomes extra active. Leadership focused on flourishing becomes generative. And the beautiful truth is that flourishing is teachable, practical, and courageous. It grows through relationships, virtues, community, meaning, and practical wisdom lived daily. And that's why I built the Flourishing Leaders Academy. That's why I started the podcast. And that's why I collaborate with scholars, practitioners, and leaders across the world. Because flourishing, real flourishing, requires all of us, across disciplines, across professions, across cultures. And my hope is that today's conversation contributes in some small way to a larger movement, a movement towards flourishing leadership, flourishing organizations, flourishing communities, and a flourishing society. Thank you so much for your time and attention and for the extraordinary work that you're doing across the social sciences to help individuals and institutions become more human, more hopeful, and more whole. I look forward to our conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Scott. I was scribbling down a few notes, obviously, as we were going through that. There's a huge number of things I think it would be great to follow up on. So I know I've certainly got lots of questions, but I want to open this up, obviously, to the audience as well. So if anyone has a question at this point, please do either type it into the meeting chat or you can raise your hand virtually, and I can open it up to you. And perhaps while we're waiting for people to, because I'm sure there'll be people who are kind of lots of ideas buzzing around their heads and thinking about how they can formulate. I think we've got one from Olympia. If I hand over maybe to you first.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Scott. That was such an interesting talk. Many things that I would like to ask you about, but I'm going to make a start asking a little bit for more insightful information in terms of the podcast. How do you see the impact of the podcast in terms of not only disseminating your work, but also influencing other researchers, leaders in your field, and whether you have any advice for any academics or other professionals that they are interested in using the podcast for similar purposes?
Thank you. Yeah, so I probably should mention, and we may get into more technical conversation later in our conversation, which would be great. I'd be happy to do that. But first, let me just say that I initially record all of the interviews, the podcast episodes over Zoom. I don't use the video footage. I get that back. I use the audio footage. Now, to answer your question, Olympia, at the end of the recording, before I leave the Zoom meeting, but after I stop the recording, I asked the guests how they feel, what they thought. Was there anything that they would like me to edit out? You need to create a safe space, because sometimes we make mistakes, or we stumble over words. And so they'll tell me whether they do or not. The next thing really gets to the heart of your question. I asked them several things. One, who might you introduce me to connect me to that might be a good guest for the podcast? They always give me a couple of names. And that's helpful to expand the reach and get more people on. The second thing I asked them is, when your podcast is released, I will let you know. It usually takes me, we just released episode 30 yesterday, and we've got 67 recorded. So we've got a lot of these, and I'm still recording more people. I'm already into series 2, so we got a ways to go. But anyway, what I also do is I ask them to, when the episode drops, to help promote it on social media. And they always do that as well. And what I find is, by asking those questions at the end of the recording and then getting their commitment to help spread the podcast on social media, is they come back to me and they tell me who they've talked to or people that have reached out to them. And then people in the different communities I'm a part of reach out to me and say, wow, that was fascinating. I never thought about it in that way. That guest was able to connect these two things that I never thought about connecting. And so I'm getting a lot of feedback. Now, I'm not doing proper scientific measurement other than the number of downloads that happen. And it's been steadily increasing. I use Buzzsprout, again, a technical thing. There's a variety of organizations that will help you publish your podcast. The one I do is they give me metrics on where they're coming from, how many downloads from each location. And so I looked last night, there was a gentleman at Fairleigh Dickinson, the provost, asked me yesterday, would you be open to, and I shared this with both Duncan and Olympia earlier, it's fascinating because the provost asked me, would you be open to us translating these podcasts into Mandarin Chinese and share this with our Chinese students in China? There's a big campus over there. And I was like, yeah, of course, that would be amazing. And so he said, do you have anybody in China downloading these? And so I went and looked at the metrics yesterday, and it turns out there's 69 countries in the world that have downloaded these podcast episodes. Now, interestingly enough, the only place in China that they've been downloaded is Hong Kong. Now, when I first told the provost, I'm a man of a certain age, I think of Hong Kong, I think of Britain, I don't think of it as China, right? So I told him, no, there's no downloads in China, just in Hong Kong. That's the closest. And he goes, Scott, I think the people in China would say Hong Kong is China. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But anyway, so there are metrics you can use. These systems will provide you how many downloads, where they're from, and it's just been growing. It's just been mind-blowing to see how this goes. And it's just like anything, really. It starts off quite slow and trickles, and eventually more people hear about it and they share with their networks and their networks and their networks. And so it's just my word of advice. If you want to start a podcast, and I encourage all of you to do it because it's a lot of work, but it's so much fun and so rewarding. What I would say is don't expect, hundreds of thousands of downloads right away. Just be patient. They'll come. I promise they'll come. And I'll just throw this out there. If you want to reach out to me for some advice, Aiden can connect you to me. Happy to answer your questions or give you advice with your podcast. But as you go along, I think you'll find over time, more and more people will be downloading them.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thanks, Olivia.
Brilliant. Well, I'm sure there will be lots of people, not just on this audience, but as we're recording it, afterwards when they look at this, you may end up getting more requests perhaps than you're anticipating, Scott. But just to kind of pick up on what you were saying there in response to Olympia's question, this idea, clearly if you've got that many episodes in the bank, it hasn't been a problem getting guests on and making those connections. And I know you mentioned about at the end of each episode, you ask people, who would you recommend? Who can you kind of connect me to? And I guess that kind of word of mouth is probably very important in, getting new guests and stuff. But thinking about those of us who may just be starting in podcasting or maybe haven't done it yet, do you have any other advice on how you might approach guests to take part in something that, whether they might be skeptical about the podcast or whether they might be skeptical about something involving an academic, or maybe skeptical about maybe something involving, character education and virtues? How do you kind of navigate, getting guests who aren't kind of coming to you or through word of mouth?
No, that's a brilliant question because not everybody knows important people. And so when I first started, I didn't really know a ton of important people. I just leveraged my relationships and my networks. And so invariably, I'm in a part of a variety of communities of practice. I started there. People that, you might find a CEO, and get the CEO on, ask them. But what you want to tell them is, I think the secret to getting people on board is coming up with your questions ahead of time and sharing the questions, and then also saying to them, I'm very open for you to modify the questions, because a couple of times I've gotten something wrong, like maybe the university location where they're working or they're something that they've done in the past. So say, I'm very open to you modifying the question. I'm very open to you deleting this question. I always create more questions than I need. just in case that happens. And then the third thing I say to them is, I'm also very open to a question that I didn't think of and or that might promote your work. And then also, if you know that they have a book coming out, just say, hey, why don't we record this 2 months before the book comes out, but I'll release it the week your book is out. And that's more promotion for your book. Excuse me. And so that's always helpful. There's books coming out. There's people changing positions. There is a lady that was in a transition in Australia who was leaving as the headmaster of one school to another school. Recorded her, but she said, can you please wait until March to release this when I take over the new school? And I said, absolutely. I also have another person that'll be coming out soon who will be officially ending her position on January 1st. And she was like, is there any way this could come out early? And I said, sure, we can get this. The earliest we can get this out is the 16th. I think there's the 16th or the 9th. Actually, maybe the next one coming out and next week, maybe. But anyway, work with the people. Say, I'm here to support what you do. I'm here to help you get this message out. Share the questions ahead of time. Show them that this isn't a gotcha kind of endeavor you're a part of. You're not trying to embarrass anybody. You want to put them in their best light. And then the second thing I would say about that, you don't have to tell them this, you can. But whenever when I started doing this podcast, I edited the first probably 6 or 7. And that was so time consuming. There's people out there that you can hire to do the editing. Now, what I do is I have an amazing partner named Claire. Aiden knows her very well. And Claire gets joy out of doing that. She's been helping me edit since I think it was episode 6 or 7. And she does that. But the key to the editing is this: make people sound better than they are, right? And what I mean by that is if they say or take that out. Right? Or if they say a word wrong and then they repeat themselves, take that out. You want people to be their best. You want them to sound good, but also people aren't going to want to listen to a podcast that sounds like people are having a conversation in a coffee shop or pub. And so put them in their best light. And that important message that you want to come out to your listeners will land better. And that's the other thing I would say. And so again, to circle back to your question, I answered this in a very long roundabout way. The way you get guests on is start with people you know. Get people on that have something they're good at, get that, and start that way and work through your networks. There's always someone that's super impressive in your network, and get them on board and get them to help. And then again, like I said before, ask them not only who should be on the podcast in their opinion, but ask them to connect you. And so what they will do is do an email and say, hey, Duncan, this is my friend Olympia. Olympia has a podcast. I would really love to be on. I was just on recently. It was a great experience, and it's going to help get your message out. And I've never had anybody say no when they do that introduction. Never. And so that introduction via email, or if it's in person, always goes really well. It's always very productive because it shows someone of some type of status has done it and has enjoyed it. And so most people, everyone has agreed to be on it after that.
Really, no, thank you very much for that answer. And it's clearly kind of, if we use academic parlance, kind of the recruitment is going to work very differently from how it would work for an academic study, but also something I know I was talking to some of my students about today. If you've got people who are used to doing research interviews for this kind of podcast are actually going to be very different. The final result is going to sound very different as well. So no, really, really interesting. But I can see Aidan, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Duncan. Thanks, Scott. Always a pleasure to hear you speak, and really engaging and illuminating. My question is in 2 parts, really. Building on the success of the podcast and building on the success of the Flourishing Leaders Academy. My question is partly about academic application in the classroom, be that at university or at school, and then partly about research. So firstly, have you thought about, or are there any plans to bring the podcast as a tool, as a piece of content into the classroom, whether that be at Fairleigh Dickinson or any other institution or school, as a way of engaging students to listen to significant people talk about, in this instance, character and virtue? And then secondly, is there any scope to use podcasts, and I think this is a more general question than just about flourishing leaders, but to use podcasts as a source of research interest, so to use them as to do qualitative research about what people are saying in the same way that you might analyze written texts.
That's a brilliant question, and both of them are, and I think it can answer them together probably. And so what I would say is, whenever we teach, we always use primary sources. That's a necessity, right? For instance, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. We need to do a little bit of that reading to then talk about virtue ethics. But we also use secondary sources. Now, one of the things I find about academic secondary sources and the work that we all do, right? The things that we publish sometimes might be hard to read, or it might be just you're coming from your perspective trying to get the word out. But that in addition to you writing these papers and these books and these book chapters, you have a conversation with people, right? And they'll be like, "Hey, Aiden, your new book is coming out. What's it about?" You answer that question very differently than the way you wrote. You might bring something up. You might say it in a different way. You'll use synonyms because you didn't memorize your book. You'll say it in a very different way that will connect with people, and they'll be like, "Oh." And so what I found is I always try to read at least several of their books or their academic papers before I interview them. And what I find is when I ask these questions that I perceived from my reading of their material, they answer it very differently. They answer it in a different way. So in a weird kind of way, if you take their academic work and you take their conversation, they're complementary and they're not necessarily the same thing, but they give you a better scope, a better picture. And so my advice would be, and now I've been out of the classroom now for a couple of years, and so I'm not in a position to be able to do this. But what I would highly encourage people to do, and I know Duncan has started doing this, is using a podcast episode of a certain person. You're not focusing on the podcast or the person doing the interview. You're focusing on the subject. And so take that person, if you're looking at their work, even if their work is secondary source to someone else, use that person's podcast because it gives you a better picture. It's just another secondary resource to use. And so I would definitely encourage that. This is another great way to think about what the author is saying in a very different context. And every time I've done these interviews, they say it in a different way, and they actually bring up stuff that they hadn't brought up in the book. And I've had several people tell me, "Man, when I revise this or I write my new book, I'm going to bring that in." And so that's super rewarding to hear. But again, for the student and for the professor, this is just a really great tool.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I completely concur. And knowing this from speaking with people, not on a podcast, but just speaking to people who have written books that I enjoyed reading or have used for my studies, and then hearing them speak about the same content in a very different way is really illuminating. And it's something I've tried to do, having now completed my doctoral studies and kind of thinking about publications, but also then how to present that, particularly in my kind of subject area and pop music and pop art. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant. So hopefully if we've got some other questions, again, please do put any comments in the chat or raise your hand. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to kind of follow up, if I may, on what Aidan asked you, Scott. So you've talked about, obviously people, when you are talking to them on the podcast, they will think about their research in different ways or think about their practice in different ways. But I was just wondering if you could say a few words about what is it about podcasts specifically, because obviously there may be other ways that, you mentioned you use the audio but not the video. For example, so there could be, you could film an interview, put it on a website, or you could put it on YouTube. I guess you could do TikTok, you could do, or you could have, written articles, where people write about things in a different way. But what is it about podcasts particularly that seem to be such a powerful kind of tool?
I really love that question, Duncan. So what I would say is that one, a lot of people, a shockingly number of people, like to listen to a podcast. And so, I'm in the middle of West Texas, middle of nowhere. I often refer to the fact that I left New York. My kids live in New York City. They work there. I feel like I'm kind of in exile, but I'm able to have a conversation with someone in Hong Kong, with New York City, in Birmingham, in Coventry. I mean, I'm able to have these conversations with people all over the world. Now, I'm not generally speaking to them, but they're listening to me speak to someone else. And so I think that's powerful in a sense that I don't get invited to webinars every week, right? But these podcasts go out every week and they go everywhere. And you might hear someone that maybe you're not interested in sport. So you're not interested in the race car driver, Tom Gaymore, but maybe you are interested in positive psychology. So Tal Ben-Shahar would be a good person to listen to. Maybe you're a business person in Germany, and so listening to Stephen M. R. Covey is meaningful to you, but positive psychology isn't that important to you. So you get that by having these different guests on and being interdisciplinary across the social sciences, it seems to reach different people. Now, you also brought up a really good point. There's a lot of work involved to use the video. I would highly encourage you. I've never tried to use Teams. I'm not Teams savvy, but Zoom is a great way, especially if you're using good microphones. And I've had people use AirPods, their regular speaker like we're doing today. And in the editing process, you can make it sound brilliant without much work. However, the editing is the next step. I don't have the time for that. I'm still writing. I'm still giving workshops. I'm still traveling. So I don't have the time to deal with the editing of the video. But what you can do, and it's very powerful, especially for younger people, right? I'm an old guy. Younger people take these videos and they put them out. You'll notice podcasters put this out, like you said, on TikTok and YouTube, and they're teasers. So you can use them as a teaser to get on to download your podcast. So maybe if your podcast comes out on Tuesday, on Monday, you put out the video teaser. People are like, ooh, I'm going to download that tomorrow. Unless you already follow or subscribe, it will automatically download. What I do instead of doing that is I take in the recording process, I go and look at the transcript and I find really great quotes that I like. And as I'm speaking to them and they say something, I kind of look at the clock during the recording and I make a time hash. So when I go back and look at the transcript, I try to find where that is. I pull the quotes out. I use Canva. I don't know if most of you use Canva. I use a template for making a quote, and I use the Flourishing Leaders Academy image of the light bulb with the tree. I put that on there, and then I put their quote in, and I put that on a Monday and Wednesday for that person as a teaser. And then their podcast drops on Tuesday and I do an announcement. And then on Thursday, I do it in case you missed it. And so that's 4 interactions that go out related to the podcast. And it goes out to the communities I'm a part of on LinkedIn. There's an algorithm. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. But what I do is I take advice from different people. One of my co-host, Jason VR, is a younger person and is super brilliant on social media. And he's helped me figure this out. So if you can engage with people and you get something out there, and maybe for your students or the people on this webinar might use the video clips for that, it gets people interested in it and want to download it. And so that's what I would encourage you to do. If you're good with video editing, use that video because it gets people's attention. And you may want to not only, and I know there's some people that do this, not only use some type of podcasting, an audio podcasting download system, but also put it out on YouTube, on a YouTube channel, put the video so they can either listen or watch the podcast, if you will. And that seems to, a lot of people are interested in that. And again, one last thing, Duncan, I know I'm talking a long time here, is what I would say is, use short. If you're going to use the video as a way to tease, I would just use a minute or less of a snippet, because the longer it is, people are going to get distracted, move on to something else. Just do that quick bit tidbit, even if it's going to be the video or audio on Tuesday. Use that short snippet on Monday to grab their attention.
Brilliant. I mean, these are really, really helpful kind of practical tips. So that's fantastic. I can see we've got a question from Chiara. So would you like to ask that verbally, or would you like me to read it? Oh, I'm afraid we can't hear you, I'm afraid. No, I'm afraid not. Should I read out the... So after inviting you to read it out,
Thank you.
So sorry about that, Chara. So, and I know, Scott, you did mention about you're not Teams savvy. We had a conversation before the webinar started about Teams, and there was, let's just say, there was quite a lot of sighing from the Warwick contingent about that. But I'll leave that there. So Chara's question: do you also use podcast notes alongside the actual podcast? So, for example, a document or web page with extra information, links, etc., that listeners can access?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought you meant something very different, which is the questions that I send to them in advance and they send back. If I rarely had anybody make any corrections, just factual corrections, not don't ask or here's a new one. So I do have the questions up on the screen and I read it and ask them to make sure I asked it the same way I did before. But to your point, yes. So what you have is an episode description. So again, there's quite a few different companies. I just happen to use Buzzsprout. I find that they're great. They're great support. So I would definitely recommend using them. But when you go in to drop your MP3 after you've completed not just the interview but editing, and let me just say also, because this might come up, there's 5 parts, at least from the way I do it. There's 5 parts to a podcast episode. And so you have your consistent intro and outro that is always there. Those are 2 different MP3 files. And then you have the interview, which is the middle bit. And then based on the middle bit, I'll write an introduction for that specific episode and a conclusion. And so it's really an introduction to who your guest is. And then at the end, the important bits that you found. I also then promote at the very end after that, the Flourishing Leaders Academy and the services that we provide. I don't do big commercials on there like Aldi or something else, right? Promoting it, Amazon or something. I don't do that because that's not the reason I'm doing this, right? I just want to share this information. We'll see if that changes in the future, but as of now, I have no intention of doing that. So you have 5 parts, the intro and outro that never changes, the intro and outro specific to the interview, and then the interview. Now, based on what I've wrote for the intro and outro really informs what I do for the episode's description. So the Buzzsprout episode description. And so I write that and then you put it in. That's where I put all the hyperlinks. Oh, so-and-so has a new article out. You can go here. Go to someone's website to learn about their coaching services. Here's a link to Amazon to their new book. And what that does is I upload that to Buzzsprout. All of that takes place when I drop the MP3 file in, the edited and joined one version MP3. I drop that in, and while I'm in there, as I drop that, that's when I fill out the episode description. And there's a thing for tags, and so anything related to that person and that conversation you had, you put those tags in so that if someone types in leadership or flourishing or sport or whatever, if someone's searching through Spotify or Amazon or Apple Podcasts, it'll trigger to pull it up. And so that's important. So yes, there's notes and hyperlinks for you to see their website, their articles, their books on Amazon, those type of things. You're welcome.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, do we have any other questions at this stage from the audience online? So either typed or if anyone wants to put their hands up. Because I know I've also got plenty of other questions in the meantime otherwise. So while we're also waiting for other people to maybe check their mics or type in some questions. I was just thinking about the advice you gave there to the answer you gave there to Chara about the way you kind of structure it. You have the same that consistent intro and outro, which is then I guess part of the branding, for want of a better word, the podcast and the series. I'm not quite sure how did you start with recording a number of episodes before you actually edited and released the first one, or did you do the first one and then you did kind of the next one? Because I think that's something that when people are starting, they might be tempted to kind of do one and put it out there, and then but some of that stuff might have to change. And
yeah, no, that's a great question, Duncan. And so I wound up doing the best thing by accident. It wasn't purposeful. So what wound up happening, I started realizing I needed to have these conversations, but I didn't know how to edit it yet. And I also was too busy, even if I knew how to edit it, to do it. So I had these windows of opportunity to talk to these people. So I recorded the first, I think, 11 before I even released it, before I even had a Buzzsprout account. I just interviewed. I recorded the Zoom just like we're doing today, and then I saved that data on the server, and then I watched some YouTube videos on how to use. I did some research on what's the best software, and I will tell you this: I found that the best software out there to use is Adobe Audition. It's the most user-friendly. There's some more complicated. And if you want, these professional broadcasters use these other things. Hey, great. I don't have the time to learn all that. But Adobe Audition is super user-friendly. There's 1 million videos on YouTube, and that's not hyperbole. There are tons on how to use it, how to make it better. Do you have a lot of static in your background? Are the voices not aligned? I mean, any kind of problem you can think of, there are tutorials on how to do a better job at that. And so when I saw that, that's the reason I got Adobe and for the editing software. And so you just drop the MP3 in or MP4 or whatever you have. It'll take video, take audio, and turn it into an MP3 for you. It's quite easy to do. So what I would encourage to get back to your question, you see, pithy is not one of my strong suits. What I would recommend you do if you want to start a podcast is record at least 5 to 10 of them ahead of time, and then get a software, learn how to use it, and then start editing. And when you've got at least 3 of them ready, decide how often you want to drop it, then you do that. I did the research. Tuesday is the day that most people download new podcasts. Tuesday and Wednesday. And so that's the reason I chose Tuesday to do it. You can go out and do the research and see. I don't know why the reason that is, but apparently Tuesday and Wednesday is the best day to drop new episodes. And so what I would say is get those episodes recorded, get a certain number of those, edit those, and that way you're always a few steps ahead, right? Before you don't want it to come out and then you're stuck. Maybe you're trying to do it weekly and then all of a sudden you don't have one ready. Now people may stop looking for you. So make your determination. Is it weekly? Is it every other week? Is it once a month? Everybody does it differently depending on the amount of content you have. But I would encourage you to record those in advance, get some of those episodes edited before you start releasing them and dropping them.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, they're really, really helpful. I've been scribbling down lots of other things that I'm going to kind of pass on to my students and stuff. I know, unfortunately, we're going to lose a few people, I think, now because we've hit the start of the next academic hour at Warwick. But obviously, I think our published finish time was 4:30. If I'm right, Aidan. So obviously, Scott and everyone else, if you're okay to keep going, that would be fantastic. So one other thing I was thinking about with that, you did mention about using Zoom, for example, to record, and then kind of software enables you to tidy that up and stuff. So because I think this is something that students in particular, but also sometimes, academics or other practitioners, if maybe they don't have the kind of institutional support, or maybe whether it's financial or equipment and stuff, that's something they can be quite concerned about. Is there going to be like a big technical, maybe financial barrier to doing this? From what you've been saying, you haven't necessarily found that to be the case, but I just wondered if you had any advice about if you, especially when you're starting out, if you don't necessarily have funding behind you or access to some of these things, what's kind of the best advice for people to start simple? And are there any particular things where if you are going to make an investment or are going to try and get hold of something, this would be the thing you would really kind of go for over everything else?
Yeah, just like anything in life, you can overspend, right? But you could do this quite inexpensively in this sense. So everybody on this webinar, I believe, is probably either student, faculty, or staff. Is that correct? So the good news for you is because Adobe does PDFs, right? Everybody in the university uses PDFs, right? So you're going to have access to that. They bundle their software. So, I don't know how Warwick does this, but generally speaking, the vast majority of universities already have this Adobe software. So what you can do is you can go through the appropriate channels at the university and say, hey, I'm a student. Hey, I'm a faculty member. Hey, I'm a member of staff. Do you have Adobe Audition? Your technical people will almost always say, yes, we have it, and then give you permission to use it. So if you're doing this as a student, maybe you do this as part of your student, you're doing it within the context of being a student. If you're going to create a podcast as a faculty or staff member, just do it within the context of that, and you get the software for free. I will say that there have been plenty. I have a microphone, and actually I was given one by my mentor. And so I do use a microphone when I record, but I've had plenty of guests that did it just like this, and the sound quality was good enough to do that. Absolutely easy to do. But what you might be able to do again as a student, faculty, or staff is go to where you can check out equipment. Sometimes we check out television, sometimes we take digital cameras, monitors, these kind of things. See if you can check out a microphone for a period of time. I'd be willing to bet most universities allow that. And so then you have the microphone for free. I know people use AirPods, and those seem to come, when I edit my guests that are using AirPods, those come out really clear. And like I said, sometimes the audio isn't the same, and sometimes it's been my fault because of the gain on the microphone. The software will clean that up and make you sound the same. And so, really the costs are, if you're using a microphone, the software, which you should be able to get both of those through the university, regardless of your status. The only other thing is the organization that distributes your podcast. You're going to have a subscription. Now, they have a free subscription where I think it's 1 hour a month free. So if you can keep your podcast to under an hour and you only do it once a month, that should be free as well. But what I would encourage you to do is if you want to put out more than one a month, a lot of universities, again, have subscriptions with these services. You just need to ask your technical people about this. So maybe you pocket on top of that and be able to, if you want to put out more than one a month. But I can't remember what I'm charged. I think I have 5 hours a month, and I think it's less than 20 quid. I don't remember exactly how much it is, but it's not terribly expensive. Now, I'm not a student anymore. 20 quid was a lot when I was a student. It may still be the case. But you should be able to get it through your university. Thank you for your kind words.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, again, I mean, this is really helpful kind of practical advice. So I think we've got a question here from Luda, who says, so again, would you like to turn your camera on or microphone on, or would you prefer me to read it?
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for the inspiring talk, Scott. I missed the beginning of the conversation, so I was just wondering whether you could share which of your experiences, because you have such a multifaceted career path, which of your experiences were the triggering point for you to start your organization, and also the podcast series. And you might have already covered this at the beginning. If not, or maybe there is something else that you might want to share, it would be great to know.
Thanks, Luda. That's a great question. We did probably cover some of this, but I'm happy to kind of talk about it again. And so really, I think where this started for me was being an Army officer and being in combat. And that kind of informed the way I thought about the things that you do that can can help you flourish and the things you do that inhibit flourishing or languishing. Obviously, in combat, there's deaths, and that really impacts people. And I think that's where it first started. The idea of flourishing and morality came into play. And then when I went to be a professor at West Point, I taught philosophy and ethics. And so the cadets, they know they're going to go be officers, and they know they're going to go into combat at the time. Now, obviously, thinking we're not really in that, but at the time they knew. And so they would ask these questions. It would get me thinking through. And so I thought about like the three main normative ethical frameworks are utilitarian, right? Which means the ends justifies the means. There are definitely some people in the military that think that, you can do whatever you want in war as long as you win the war. That to me is immoral. You can't do that. And then if you think about deontology, which is basically a rules or duty-based system, the thing about rules, right, is generally speaking, they're good. But sometimes rules allow you to get away with doing something you shouldn't have done. And sometimes rules prohibit you from doing the morally right thing. So that didn't seem like a good thing. So that's how I settled on virtue ethics, the idea that it's context specific what the right thing is. Me screaming at Aiden right now would not be appropriate. That would not be the right thing to do, right? But if Aiden was looking, someone was passing him, or someone overkicked a football over his head and he's looking and he's running into the road, me screaming at him, that would be the morally right thing to do in that moment. So it's really context dependent, and I felt like that was more about it. And then interacting with cadets and talking about that got me to think more about virtue and character. And then I realized character's not the only thing. That goes back to just being theory, really, right? We could practice it, but going back to character isn't sufficient. Really what we want is a flourishing life. And so character is one small but important component of that. And that's what took me to flourishing. And that's how I settled on this. And then ultimately, what prompted me, and I kind of alluded to this earlier when I talked about the golden mean instrument, the GMI, is that I was in a very toxic situation. And I finally it was not, the short version of the story, I was so stressed out by this, I got an aneurysm, and I had to have surgery to repair the aneurysm. And I was like, you can't keep doing this to yourself. You got to go. And that was the impetus for starting this. And it was scary because, I didn't know if anybody would care about this. I would get any workshops or anybody listen to a podcast. But it solved itself. Over time, it began to grow. And so what I would say to anyone that wanted to start something, follow your heart, follow your thought. There's ways that you can be successful, leverage your networks and your friends, and you will ultimately become successful. Some people, it may happen for overnight. It didn't happen for me overnight. It took some time, but now I'm doing well. And hopefully I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. I actually have a follow-up one, if you don't mind.
Okay, don't mind.
We work within our team. We work with students and recent graduates who are on the journey of establishing their own startups. And we're supporting them with the skills development, but also with their business development to explore other self-employment options apart from being within the set career path. And I was just wondering whether, looking back on your journey as a founder of the Flourishing Leaders Academy and or founder of the podcast series, whether there are some challenges that you think are the ones that are actually shaped your journey differently within that organization and as a founder. And the other one is if there is some advice, for instance, if you were to know something that you know now that would have been really helpful for you at the beginning.
Yeah, no, those are great. Yeah, Luda, those are great questions. So what I would say about that is the first important thing to be successful, because I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what to charge people. Like, how do you figure that out? That's very difficult to do. And so what I did is first thing I did is I leveraged my networks. I shared with them that I was starting this new thing. And the second thing is, I think it's really important to be willing to do initially, do your work for free. Like in my case, give workshops for free, go out and talk to their employees for free, knowing that, and then I'm also an executive coach, giving that away for free at first, because then people see the quality of your work and then they'll share it. So leverage your networks. That's the big thing. And also be willing to, at first, give it for free. So if you're doing like keynotes, do that keynote for free. Maybe one person in that audience will be like, this would be great for my organization. You may only get one or two. And so at first it's going to be very lean. At first you're not going to see a lot of traffic. Don't let that discourage you, because if you're just patient and you just allow this to work out, eventually you'll get more than you can handle. And that happens. It just takes a little while. So be patient with yourself, leverage your networks, and be willing to give it away for free at first. And then everything else will really fall into place. Everybody kept telling me that, and I didn't believe them, and it became true. So it works that way for most people, I believe.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lyndon.
Brilliant. So, Olympia?
Thank you so much. I have to say I'm so taken away from all this very interesting conversation. I was wondering, I know that it may be difficult to pick one, but from the 67 episodes that you have recorded so far, and I don't want to ask you to pick your favorite kid, but are there any takeaway messages that stayed with you and somehow you think had a major effect on you as a leader, as a podcaster, and as a researcher?
Oh, goodness. Some of these I've had Jason record with me, some of them I've done on my own. But every time I get done with this, I usually tell my partner, Claire, that was my favorite episode ever. I just keep saying that. So that can't obviously be true. I just feel that way in the moment. I've learned so many great lessons from these. And I think maybe if I had to pick one, and if you asked me this tomorrow, I'd give you a different answer probably. But if I had to pick one, I think the only Stoic that we've released so far is Tom Morris. But I've spoken with 6 Stoics. Then we need to start putting them out because they're brilliant. The thing I learned from them is several things. One, remember you can't control other people because they're going to do and say what they want. And if you realize that you can't control them or stop them, and if you know that a certain person is going to behave in a certain way and you realize you can't control them, it's very freeing, because then you don't stress about it or worry about it because you can't control them. Even if they're directing the vitriol at you, you can't control that. So I think that's brilliant. The second is that there's a gap between stimulus and response. So there's a gap between what something happens and your response to it. And so, a classic example might be someone cut you off in traffic. And so your instant, is to give them 2 fingers or something, or say something out loud that you wouldn't normally say. If you take that moment and say to yourself, because we've all done this, right? We've all cut people off in traffic because maybe we're in a hurry, there's a rush, we're late for work, we're late for the webinar, we're taking a child to the emergency department or something. If you just say to yourself, maybe this person's going to their sick partner, maybe they're going to get their child from school, maybe then you calm and relax. Your blood pressure goes down, you relax. And so a lot of the Stoic principles are super useful, super practical, and will help contribute to a flourishing life. So today, my answer to your question, Olympia, is that I think some of the best takeaways come from the Stoics that I've interviewed, and have been the most practical in my life.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I almost feel bad asking this question in a way, because a lot, clearly in that answer there, but a lot of what you've been talking about already is clearly about the influence this can have on us as humans, as people. This can be really transformative in our lives. To put it really bluntly, as kind of many of us on this call obviously are working, studying in universities, maybe working as researchers, maybe struggling with a bit of work-life balance and trying to find when do we have time for all of these things. And impact is a word that we hear all the time, important principle and buzzword and stuff like that. Clearly, I don't just mean here in terms of the kind of metrics of how many people listen to the podcast or download it, but just that human impact from what you've been talking about seems very clear. But in terms of how you might explain to academics, how can we kind of get across what the importance of this as research might be? So how can we communicate this to institutions, for example, who may have very different metrics or criteria in mind? How can we kind of justify maybe the time this might take or the effort, in relation to our research?
Yeah, so as I'm gonna repeat the question back to you to make sure I'm tracking your question. Is the big important part of your question, is it that how do we convince senior faculty, senior administrators that using podcasts is important?
Yeah, that was what I was hoping to ask, and you've
Okay.
repeated it in a much more succinct way. Yeah.
So, one thing I'll say first about this is that when you in a conversation with another human, you want to be mindful, you want to be attentive and listen to what they're saying, right? And as you were asking that question, I realized I wasn't doing that. I realized I was trying to answer the question as you went along. That's the reason I phrased the question back to you. What I would say is that this is coming from an old person, right? I'm an old person. And so I'm about to say something negative about old people. And I just wanted to remind people that I'm an old person saying this. People get comfortable. People are comfortable with the way things work. At one point, we didn't have color television. At one point, we didn't have Sky TV, right? At one point, we didn't have, mobile phones. Things change and things for the better. There's a lot of people my age that are against AI. AI can be an effective tool if you use it the right way. Well, podcasts also can help you as a professor, as a researcher, as another source of information and another scholarly source. You obviously need to use a reputable source. You're not going to use Rogan's podcast to support your academic research, right? But what you can do is you can, have that delicate conversation with the senior administrators who are old like me and just say, look, this is super useful. This is super impactful. And maybe you give examples to show how find the podcast you like that has the people sharing the information that supports your research, and say, just listen to the snippet. Let them listen to 30 seconds. Can you see how this is the same thing as a secondary source or a trade book that would support my work? We need our students to have access to this. Now, I think you have a better sell with the senior people with podcasts than you will with AI, because a lot of them still think that's plagiarism. But you just have to walk the dog on that and explain and show how this is a useful tool. And you could probably ask AI, how do I explain to a baby boomer? How do I explain to this boomer that this is important? And maybe, it's to say, I want to do this in a very diplomatic and delicate way. Maybe AI can help you have that conversation with that person, but bring and show them, make them listen to just a snippet and say, this is a great tool for students. You're very removed from students at this point. Remember when you were a student and the things that you used. Well, this is what students want to use today, and this is how you should use it. That's how I would approach it, Duncan.
No, I think that's really good advice, because it's kind of the same podcast, the same conversation, the way you can kind of tailor it to different audiences, highlight certain things to make sure you're kind of engaging with them, making it relevant for them, I think is something that's really coming through very strongly. So do we have any other questions from the other audience members, or Aidan or Olympia? Any other questions?
Really enjoyed hearing the different aspects of the making of a podcast, having been sort of semi-involved in it in a previous role at a previous institution, and not thinking that we'd made the most of that opportunity with the podcast that we produced. Really interesting to hear the different ways in which you could take the idea of building a podcast platform. I mean, in a very, very saturated market, it's great to hear that it's still possible to kind of form and take an idea and create this organically and make it successful. But there's no real question there. It was just a sort of summative comment.
So Can I, something I just thought of that Aiden made me think about, and something you said before, Duncan, is in your role, both of you, Duncan and Olympia, well, and Aiden as well, what I would encourage you to do is whoever is able to make these decisions, whoever the decision makers are, if you have a class that one of the graded events is a presentation, why not let them present a podcast? They don't have to just stand in front of the room or go up and play a song, a guitar, or whatever it is, however you do the presentation, have them do that. And if they don't, if they have other means of presentations, why not open it up to podcasts? And then you just, what you could do is either play it in the classroom in that period of time that's allotted for that, or just make it homework. That they go and listen to their fellow student who's presenting on this work, because what they're going to have to do, just like I do, is do the research. That's really what you want, is you want them to do research and then present what they found and their conclusions, right? You can do that in a podcast, just like you can do it in front of the room at the podium or in any other way. So I would encourage decision makers to encourage the instructors below them and the professors to let that be an option of presentation.
Such a great advice, and especially at these current times when we are thinking about our assessments in terms of the challenges that we experience with AI, and trying to be creative in a space that requires some serious rethinking in the current times.
Yeah, I agree, Olympia.
And I think one of the things as well that can be really powerful about using podcasts as forms of assessment as well is the fact that then that can have its own real world impact for the students, because they can then share it with a wider audience who will kind of engage with it in a different way than if they just put one of their assignments online and ask people to read it. They can get that real world feedback as well as their academic feedback from their instructors. That can be, that can then start those other conversations that will, take them places far beyond just a kind of simple piece of assessment for a particular module.
Duncan, and a sales pitch to the faculty and staff might be this. We've all had to mark papers, especially in the social sciences, and that can just take all night, all weekend, and you're just like, oh, I don't want to grade any, I don't want to mark any more of these papers. This is a different way of doing it. You're not reading someone's dribble, you're listening. So maybe what you could do potentially, if you already have the matrix in your head, your grading matrix, and you're thinking, you could do it on the drive, you could do it on the train, and you can listen to that without having to just be reading a piece of paper or looking at your tablet or laptop. So it's also a different way for the instructor to assess them. And so you're getting a different medium, which shakes it up and makes it more interesting and gives you a break from reading.
I think that's a very good way of thinking about it as well. Just to also follow up, so I can see Chara, thank you very much, has put something in the comments on the chat, following up with the earlier thing about kind of impact and the more kind of academic metrics that may be involved, mentioning that altmetric now includes mentions in podcasts as one of their measures. And so that could also help as evidence to support you in conversations with seniors who may be dubious about their kind of academic rigor. So, perhaps some of these supporting systems and kind of institutional things are slowly starting to kind of catch up with what people who are already doing these podcasts kind of know, which is great. And I can also see a comment here from Luda as well, who said the IATL, so this is our at Warwick, our Institute of Advanced Teaching and Learning, so a kind of institute that encourages interdisciplinary modules and students from different levels, different disciplines working together. The IATL interdisciplinary modules use student-devised assessment, where students could choose what format to present their assessment, and podcasts are one of those. So I think those more creative options and giving students the chance to experiment with podcasts and things where they're also then learning some of those technical skills and public engagement skills as well at the same time as doing the particular assessment. So yeah, thank you very much, Chiara and Luda, for those suggestions. So do we have any final questions? I feel we've been making the most of Scott's time here, but it's been incredibly enlightening and rewarding, I know, for me, and I'm sure for many other people on the webinar as well. But do we have any kind of final burning questions that people would like to ask? No, so I just wonder then, Scott, before we kind of thank you and do our closing, is there anything else that you would like to add or pass on to the guests?
One thing that based on what Chara and Luda just said made me think, if we want the best for our students, give them the best way to present that. So if we know someone's not a strong writer, and we all need to improve in different things, but they know the material and they can present it in a podcast, I would encourage you to allow them to be the best version of themselves and use their strengths to show you that they know the material. And in those instances, I would encourage you to use a podcast if that's what's best for the student.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I think you've given all of us an awful lot to think about. Obviously, in terms of the work you're doing with the Flourishing Leaders Academy and that whole side of character education and bringing in virtue ethics, but also just in terms of all the different things we can use podcasting for with that kind of public engagement and teaching, assessment, our research and stuff. So thank you very much indeed, Scott. For today. This has been brilliant. I'm sure we'll also have lots of people watching this later with the recording who'll also, I've got no doubt, learn a lot from it as well. So thank you to Scott. Obviously, thank you to Aidan and Leela and Olympia as well here for and everyone else for kind of organising it. Aidan and Olympia, do you have anything to follow up on? Because I know obviously we have, without wishing to be rude to Scott as our current guest, obviously we'll have other guests coming up as well in future webinars.
Yes, got 2 more lined up for this academic year, hoping to add maybe 1 more to that in the summer term. But we have George Kearney-Bambridge speaking to us in February. She is the CEO of Envision, which is a locally based but national charity working with young people on social action projects in schools, particularly in deprived inner city areas in Bristol and in Birmingham. And we have Charlotte Hill, OBE, who was formerly the CEO of the Step Up to Serve charity that ran the I Will movement, and is now CEO of the Felix Project, which works on redistributing food to the homeless in London. George will be speaking about engaging schools and using academic insights into her work in supporting schools. Charlotte will be talking about engaging policymakers to make kind of big decisions in that civic environment.
Just maybe to quickly add also my heartfelt thanks to Scott for such a fascinating talk today and for answering all the questions and sharing so generously your insights from all the work you have been doing, both in terms of the Flourishing Academy, but also in terms of the podcast. And a big thank you also to Duncan for chairing the sessions, to Aidan and the colleagues from the Connect team for organizing, and to all of you for being here this afternoon. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again in one of our next webinars, and also to all the alumni colleagues that they will have the opportunity to watch the video afterwards. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.